And good morning. We are here in the historic Breitbart Embassy in Washington, D.C. Welcome to War Room Pandemic, episode 29. I am Jason Miller, former senior communications advisor for President Trump's historic 2016 campaign. And I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Hatfill and Maura Moynihan here in studio. We're going to be diving into a lot. On the line, we have Jack Maxey. And joining us a little bit later, we'll have Stephen K. Bannon, our fearless leader, who's currently on assignment today, getting ready for Maria Bartiromo's show tomorrow, 10 a.m. on Fox News. Make sure to tune in and watch Steve talk about all things coronavirus. Jack, we have you on the line here. I want to do a level set with the way that we now have this convergence of all things political and the global coronavirus pandemic that is breaking out here. Get us up to speed on the latest news, what's going on. We're hearing about more of these community spread cases in California, but we're hearing states like Washington, Oregon, and Texas. Catch us up.
Well, listen, the pandemic has now reached nearly 60 countries. Ironically, the World Health Organization still refuses to call it such. Sustained person-to-person transmission inside the USA is likely a possibility now. We had a third suspected case last night in the Pacific Northwest who actually worked in an elementary school in Oregon. And very late last night and this morning, they identified a fourth student in Washington. Now, of the first of those, three of them, we don't know who they got it from. It's unclear with the student in Washington, so that means there's either a super spreader out there or these people are coming in contact with other people who have the disease. I think as the CDC has now ramped up their testing, which I think will begin very rapidly, we are likely, in my opinion, to see other cases that will be shown to be out there, because the statistics just would lead us to think that these people who have been shown to be infected will probably likely to have infected others. Very important part of this program today, which we're going to get into in a minute, is what's next for America. How do we prepare for what is coming? And we hope that we can ameliorate the worst parts of it by an effective plan on the state, local, inside corporations, inside schools, families, and at the individual level, practicing social separation to ameliorate the worst parts of an influenza epidemic, which really are the disruption of the normal functioning of, say, our hospital systems and the economy. And Stephen Hatfill, even though Steve Bannon likes to talk about his book as being a thriller, really it is an outstanding manual for how public health systems should respond to an influenza epidemic. So I'm really excited to have Steve on. Obviously, around the world, things are not looking good. It's getting a little worse every day. South Korea now has 813 new cases as of Saturday, with 3,150. One of those cases is an American serviceman who is self-quarantining. The New England Journal of Medicine published a study yesterday which seems to confirm the death rate as being around 1.5%. 1.4% was what they came from a study of 1,099 patients. Interestingly, 4 out of 5 Americans surveyed by a global research firm Ipsos said they think government should quarantine entire cities if there is an outbreak of the new coronavirus.
Wow.
So roughly 80% of Americans are kind of starting to take this seriously, at least in terms from a public health perspective. France, 57 confirmed. Italy, 23 dead, 820 infected. Australia now has 25. UK, 20. Denmark got their first case today. Iceland, their first case yesterday. It really is starting to beginning to look like this is something that we're just simply going to have to deal with, and deal with like we always do as Americans, with strength and assertiveness. One thing I would like to say before I go too long about the test kits that we were having problems with. I know this is a huge issue for people. Apparently, the CDC is saying that the testing for the coronavirus was pretty effective, but they had attached the influenza virus and multiple other viruses to the original test kit, thinking that we can do a broad spectrum test to eliminate various things. And it was really the other viral tests that were not working that well. They've eliminated that part of it, so that it's just a two-step process in the tests that are out there, and they are sending out multiples of new and improved tests that meet this new criteria. And also they have expanded, and I think this shows you that they are starting to take this seriously. They've expanded the criteria for testing. Prior, it was very tight. Did you know anybody who'd been to Hubei province? Have you traveled to Asia? These sorts of things. Did you have contact with somebody who was a known infected person? And now I think they're really going to try and expand the testing to almost anybody who is showing severe symptoms, respiratory systems, and then obviously in a much more concerted way in areas where we have infected people. So
Jack,
that's really the top of the line.
Yeah, Jack, and that's important when you talk about how this is now impacting everybody. I mean, even a lot of times, personally, when I'm talking about politics or things like that or what's happening in the world, my family, I grew up in Seattle, in a suburb of Linwood, which is right next door to Mill Creek, where one of these cases are. And so, I've heard from my family in the last 24 hours about, wait a minute, this isn't just something you're talking about with Stephen Bannon and Jack Maxey and Dr. Hatfield and Maura Moynihan and folks in Washington. This is right here. Dr. Hatfield, so you're now starting to get the articles on it's not overreacting. You're even seeing left of center publications like Vox put out articles on essentially like polite ways of saying here's how to be a prepper in a smart way. What should people be doing or thinking through as we talk about this, the expanding coronavirus? What can people do that's not in the overreacting but smart preparations, whether you're an individual or a business owner or anybody else?
The same as anything, sort of a disaster that may be looming. Not saying that this will be a disaster, but prepping is essential. If you can. Many families can't. Several weeks food in case the supply chains are disrupted. If your town is quarantined, whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, you still got to get goods and services in and out. The trash has to be collected. Bread just doesn't magically appear in the local grocery stores. It's a very complex system that gets it from the field to the fork. The same with pharmaceuticals, the same with gasoline, same with diesel fuel. If there's a disruption in any of these infrastructures because of worker illness or fear, it can tip the whole thing to a lower level of complexity.
So let's stay with that for a moment here. I want to talk about the known unknowns, so to speak. So remember back in, say, the terrorist attacks of 9/11, the first plane hits the tower and people are wondering, is this some kind of attack or is this a plane that's gone rogue? A second plane hits. We're like, New York is under attack. Then the plane crashes into the Pentagon. We're like, wait a minute, the entire country is now under attack. As we talk about these community spreads, as we talk about the actions that are going on here, what are some of the known unknowns that could be coming up for the United States? And again, we've seen pretty strong action from the administration. I think if President Trump hadn't taken that action with shutting down those flights early on with regard to China, we could be in a lot worse place right now. Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of folks in the media aren't quite grasping or realizing that, this move to quarantine Americans for the first time in 50 years. But what are some of these known unknowns about where this could grow or what some of the implications could be of actions that we take for community separations or such?
And also, let me interject real quick here, Doc, just because, we are always short for time. I think we could all talk about this for hours. Why don't you, Stephen, lay out for us exactly how the National Pandemic Preparedness Program is actually supposed to work, and so we can encourage our listeners to reach out to their local officials to make sure that they get on the ball and prepare for what and hopefully does not come to their hometown.
That's probably the best idea. In 2005, President Bush initiated a national pandemic plan. By itself, the document wasn't that much, but Health and Human Services expounded upon it and started to put some details on it. And it was the first time, really, in our history where we had any sort of a plan. We had tried since the 1970s, but we couldn't get the different factions of the federal government together to cooperate or to accept who's going to be responsible for what, and it just never materialized. Now we've got a national pandemic plan. It was just recently reevaluated and upgraded in 2017. And it has the same problems as Katrina had. You know, before Katrina and the hurricane in New Orleans, there was a national plan for the.
Where is that housed? Like, who owns that national pandemic plan?
We own it as a nation. It's a guideline for how things will happen. Well, that's fine. You can have a guideline, but the problem is the local authorities have to be able to respond. And they didn't in Katrina. The federal plan worked great, right to the point where, we didn't do that at the local authority level, and then it fell to pieces and the military had to come in and take over. Right now, the United States the federal government's done what it's supposed to do in the federal plan. That is, stockpile drugs and vaccines, find new drugs, which is, as we speak, this is happening. Clinical trials are underway. And use these drugs to cover the period, what we call the vaccine gap, the period between a disease appears and the time we can actually get a vaccine in appreciable amounts into the population. Vaccine gap. Federal government has done that. The next portion of the plan is the local authorities. And there's 5 things they have to do. And if the local authority can do this medical surge, the increased availability of hospital beds and medical personnel to handle the increased numbers of patients, if a local community can do that, then it's free to handle other aspects like worker absenteeism, picking up the trash, ensuring food deliveries, restocking, this type of thing. So there's sort of 5 components to establishing a medical surge. And it requires both state and local authority cooperation. For example, local authorities are responsible for recruiting volunteers, pandemic volunteers, and training them so they can work safely in a hazardous environment, essentially.
So let me ask you this question. When I ask the question about who owns this, and we talk about directives and how this comes together, I mean, are these ultimately edicts that are coming from, whether it be HHS or NIH or CDC, which government entities, or is it all at the state level? How do these...
It was combined.
Okay.
It was combined. And
Stephen, let me interject real quick. The federal government has given state and local municipalities literally billions of dollars to create their own stockpiles, to create their own strategic supplies for local needs. And one of the problems, Stephen, you and I have talked about this at length, and we've talked about it with Rosemary Gibson, is that there's no inventory control, and we're not really sure what they have. So now, even on the basic level, now would be a good time to go, unlock the doors of the warehouses and see what you got. And it would be really helpful, I think, for our listeners, Steve, for you just go through the bullet points, those 5 things.
Let me go through the bullet points. 1, recruit and train volunteers that are willing to put themselves in that situation and help with the medical crisis. This requires a cooperation with the states, because if you've been a retired doctor for 40 years, we have to go back and make sure you were once really a doctor. Yeah? And keep an electronic database. So credential validation and the level. And states can reactivate you temporarily in an emergency. So that needs to be done. 2, local authorities should have already been they've had 15 years. They should already have been stockpiling their very basic medical equipment, i.e. masks. This huge thing, we don't have enough masks. The hospital should have their own supplies. They were told. It was explained. They agreed. But they didn't do that. They were given money. And if they did do some stuff, they did very poor inventory control. And that's the basis to even a small business, is inventory control. Secondly, there was supposed to have been the development of an electronic system for hospital bed tracking. How many beds does this facility have open? Are they on diversion? Are the people in the beds in the hallways now? Have they done their surge? And they need an alternate care site. These alternate care sites should be selected, i.e., close the high schools and use those as treatment centers. And this can be done very safely. You can move a whole laboratory in to a cupboard. Most things are handheld now, assays. It's amazing what you can do. So alternate care sites are formed. And then we needed state guidelines, each state, for crisis alterations and triage. Can we use registered nurses practitioner on phone lines saying, no, that doesn't sound too severe. Go to this area, and get your testing. Or, well, your child sounds very ill. You need to bring them in, and we'll make an arrangements for them to be seen. So nurse triage lines. This was done very successfully in up north.
Which I also might interject. I had a dinner on Wednesday night with several guys from Europe. They are doing this right now in Italy. Belgium just launched plans to do it early this week, and I don't even think they have a case or maybe one case in Belgium now. So, and Japan is doing the same thing, and also Korea. So this is, we're not making this up.
No, and we have good examples. Of Philadelphia in 1918, the infrastructure was collapsing. They'd had it. There were bodies in the streets. A group of volunteers came together, local businessmen and women, highly motivated people, and they saved the city. And it's the same things that we would do today.
Doctor,
what was it called? The Filber 100?
They established a Filber 100 call line, which we're calling nurse triage lines now. And they really got things going. The fifth thing, though, and very important, is the state should have been making procedures for crisis alterations in mass patient care. Hospitals are terrified of doing anything unless the legislation accompanies it. So right now, we should be selecting in the Washington, D.C. areas where we can use and memorandums of understanding so we can establish mass care centers. But the legislation doesn't allow that.
So this is where I want to get to, because as we talk about the decentralization or the state level efforts here, do we know then, because you talked earlier about needing to get an inventory, essentially opening the books in the warehouses about where things are, do we know what areas of the country or what states are prepared and have great plans put together, or which are behind and aren't ready for this?
I think it was 2007, it might have been 2010, Asper, the Assistant Secretary for Pandemic Readiness, Preparedness and Readiness, did a survey of local authorities, and none of them were ready. The states didn't do too badly, but they still hadn't addressed things like altering mass care or fixing the guidance for this so that local authorities could go ahead and finish their planning.
Because one of the smartest things, Doctor, and you said a lot of smart things on the show here over the weeks. One of the smartest things you said early is where the rubber is really going to hit the road is the local preparedness, these local hospitals. What happens when a Mill Creek, Washington goes from being a town that no one's ever heard of to being front and center? Are they ready down at that local level? This is going to be so critical. What is the message that we should be hearing from the Vice President, from Secretary Azar, from this coronavirus task force? What message should they be sending, and what should they be doing right now to make sure that these local communities are ready to go?
Well, you can't do this at the last second. This requires pre-planning. If it's going to be rushed, it makes it very, very difficult to do it accurately. If we need some bullet points here, there's been some hiccups with the test kits for one reason or another. Addressed in a number of ways. Chinese data shows that we can use chest CT scans for reliable diagnosis. There needs to be immediate FDA evaluation of this, and yes or no, can we do this? To be used in conjunction if we have test kits or if we don't.
All right, listen, people, we'll be back after a break, and Steve Bannon will be joining us. And hang on, this thing is not over.
All right, we're here at War Room Pandemic, and when we come back after the break, Stephen K. Bannon will be joining us, and we will hear from the uncharacteristically quiet Maura Moynihan, longtime activist with Students for a Free Tibet. We're going to take a look at China, including Disease X, which you're going to want to stick around to see why Disease X was such a big deal and why we knew that something like the coronavirus was coming. And again, this is War Room Pandemic. We will be back right after the break.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
And we are back. War Room Pandemic, episode 29, joined here in studio by Dr. Stephen Hatfill, as well as Maura Moynihan. On the line, we have Jack Maxey and our illustrious founder, Stephen K. Bannon. Stephen?
How you doing, sir? Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Steve, Dr. Hatfill wants to, he has a couple points that he wants to finish up here, but give us...
We can't get enough Dr. Hatfill.
No, he's great. Dr. Hatfill, catch us up on your points. I want to have Steve Bannon talk about the world economy and what's happening this week.
We can do this pretty quick. We don't know how many cases are in here being transmitted person to person within the United States. With this type of thing, you have to plan, will be, but you have to plan for the worst. We've mentioned we can use, it looks like we can use CT scans, lung CT scans, to diagnose coronavirus cases.
Has that been widely reported? This is the first time I've heard that.
It's been tried, but there's now recently, as of yesterday, a pre-publication has appeared from China, from Chinese scientists and a few U.S. scientists involved, and doctors, showing that, yeah, it looks like we can do this, and they compared it with the normal PCR. Second, we've had enough time now to make antibodies. So, like the pregnancy test kits, but a very sensitive version called ELISA. And we can use two different types, immunoglobulin M and immunoglobulin G antibodies. And we need to start these as not only a backup, but for confirmatory testing. So these antibody test kits need to start to be manufactured and distributed, tested, verified by FDA, and distributed through the National Laboratory Response Network. Finally, a lot of Americans don't know this, but Northcom in the military maintain an 18,000 soldier unit called the CBRN Response Enterprise. And their sole task is to provide civil support to local authorities in the event of a catastrophic incident. Now, it was designed for biological weapon attacks and chemical weapon terrorist attacks, but its use in pandemic response is incalculable. What a valuable resource. It looks like we're having person-to-person transmission in California, although it's just a couple of cases. It looks like we may be having it in Oregon. This unit's job is to rapidly deploy and assess the situation and bring in resources, if they're needed, from the military to help the local authority. Why don't we pre-position these? And it's a good exercise if nothing happens. Benjamin Franklin, I believe it was, who said, always prepare for the worst, and if it doesn't happen, be pleasantly surprised. This is just prudent. And we have this wonderful resource called the CST teams from the National Guard. Many of their members are qualified to do PCR rapid testing if they had the test kits. They're also experts at teaching people how to protect themselves with masks and gloves and simple measures, but effective. Their job is to support civil authorities in the time of a crisis. Why don't we start getting them out and letting them do their job? They have a van that drives in that has a complete laboratory. All they need are the test kits, and they can help catch up on the backlog of testing. They're certified to do this. They have a communications van that looks like something out of Star Trek inside that can actually talk to the CDC Emergency Operations Center real time. So data can start to flow, and we can start to see as this evolves, or where are we going to need resources? How do we keep on top of this, and how do we further try to contain it?
So when you talk about Northcom, this is the military's role then.
Yes, Northern Command.
Northcom, I think, is
Right.
out of Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Yes, yes, it
Okay.
is.
Its command is really North America, and obviously it's very sensitive to posse comitatus and things like that.
Yeah.
But
Right.
Northcom-
That's where I want to make
Northcom-
sure.
Yeah, Northcom's actual mandate, this came after 9/11, came to highlight what is actually making sure that things in the United States are sorted out, and their specialty of things like this deployed during catastrophic incidents like a biological weapons attack or the problem with a pandemic. In fact, that's why I wanted to ask. I want to bring Mara in here, and Dr. Hatfield to jump in. Here's one of my concerns. This show has been relatively China-centric from its beginning, and the reason is that what drove us to do this was this kind of unprecedented in scale situation they had in Hubei province in Wuhan. What I can't understand from the data, because they're just putting out official Chinese data, and Mara, I'd like your opinions on this, is that it looks like the social separation may be starting to kick in and may be starting to work. But the CCP has put out a mandate just this morning that they want workers, particularly in the central and southern part of the country, to go back to work, to get back to the factories. And can that cause another second wave? I mean, Mara, you're an expert in these divisions between the Chinese Communist Party, but they look like these numbers that have just come in are so horrific as far as their economy goes. I mean, the numbers that they're putting out show the most dramatic actual collapse of the manufacturing side of the Chinese economy that's ever been seen since they've risen to be an industrial power. So, Mara, what's your take on this?
Well, for a very long time, all of us who've been working on human rights in China and liberating the Chinese people, the subject peoples from the Chinese Communist Party, I've never seen numbers like this. It's the only legitimacy the CCP possesses is that they've been able to deliver money. And once that's gone, their legitimacy is gone as well. And one of the biggest power struggles in the world, perhaps the biggest power struggle in the world, which never gets reported in mainstream media, it does get covered in Chinese media. Epoch Times has done a good job, and of course we tried to discuss it at Radio Free Asia, is the power struggle behind the curtain at the CCP in the Politburo between the Red Hands faction and the White Hands faction. And it's a group of old men who circle around each other. And Xi Jinping and Wang Quishan are part of the White Hands faction. Jiang Zemin, Bo Xilai are the Red Hands faction. And they are jockeying for power now with the crisis of the pandemic. It gives the Red Hands faction, which is on the outs right now, an opportunity to weaken Xi Jinping. And one thing that is not getting reported widely in mainstream media, of course, is showing the priorities of the CCP with this this catastrophe, this humanitarian disaster that is spreading out in the largest country in the world. Instead of mobilizing citizenry, as Dr. Hatfield has explained, should happen, and would happen in any open society, where Dr. Li, the martyr, first alerted Beijing to the coronavirus. Well, he was punished and had to write a self-confession, and he's dead, and he's now a martyr. In any other society, he'd be a hero. He'd probably be leading the response teams. Well, in the last 2 months, since it went global, the knowledge of the coronavirus, what has the CCP done? They have destroyed Buddhist temples, mosques. Last night, they arrested Jimmy Lai and 2 other dignified and elder leaders of Hong Kong society for spreading rumors against the government. Is this the best way to use their resources? But of course, the real power struggle is between the White Hands faction and the Red Hands faction. So I think it's just going to bring more chaos. And of course, they've got to send people back to the factories. Because if the economy continues to nosedive as it has, so goes the legitimacy of the CCP. And the thing they fear the most, of course, is an uprising by the Chinese people.
So, I want, yeah, go ahead,
Hang
Steve.
on. Let me just, Jason. Let me just ask one question, Dr. Heffer, off of that, and then you can jump in. Is that Dr. Heffer? Here's what we'd like your opinion on. Given the fake numbers they put out, the official numbers, because about how you tested and how they count the dead. Do you think? Because you said this early on in the first couple episodes, with no vaccine, dramatic action on social separation, i.e., quarantine, or is going to have to see if it works. Do you think today? Because until you get your hands around this issue in Wuhan or Hubei, it's never going to be solved throughout the world. Do you think, as you see it today, that their quarantine and social separation is working?
We're starting to see the slope of new cases plateau. I don't think it's at its peak yet, but it looks like it's dramatically slowing. The last thing you want to do is take your hand off of this and send people back into the factories and kick it off again. We don't know the level of herd immunity that's developed in these communities. And if it hasn't, you're going to kick it back off. We did the same thing in 1918 in World War I, where we kept sending troops over to Brest, France, to the disembarkation points, until the point that these soldiers are actually dying on the ships going over, and we just kept sending them and sending them and sending them, until more soldiers died of influenza than bullets and bombs on both sides. So they have some serious issues that they have to face. If they send these workers, and I think they're very patriotic people, they will, I think, go into the factories again. But without training and without care, it could become an incubator for a resurgence.
In your understanding, given it's a crisis of legitimacy right now, do you think there's anything that holds the CCP from forcing workers to go back and trying to kickstart these factories?
Well, the CCP has no problem at all inflicting violence upon its citizens. That's the only reason it stayed in power for 70 years. And if you have, we've seen images that are making their way to Twitter, and Guo Media has done an excellent job of capturing netizen footage of teams of CCP agents coming to houses and dragging people into vans. And as you've discussed on the show, once you go into one of those quarantine centers, you only come out in a body bag. And so in a society that is entirely ruled by a group of old men in the Politburo, I see tremendous weakness in how they respond to this crisis. There's also the flow of information in China is not open. And that's why they just arrested a group of monks in Tibet for talking about the severity of the crisis and how there should be more measures taken. So I think the regime, also the narrative that the Western elites have promoted for so long about the vaunted efficiency of the CCP that can do everything better than we can, which is what Michael Bloomberg said the whole 12 years he was mayor of New York. Well, it's being sorely tested now, isn't it?
Correct. Jason, go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, and Steve, actually I wanted to tee this question up for you. I mean, we're seeing supply chains being reimagined. We're seeing there's news out today in the FT that the Chinese factory index hits a record low based on the coronavirus. And our own Jack Maxey sent me a link just during the commercial break that this economic ramification hits so hard that the airborne nitrogen dioxide levels have plummeted over China because there's just not the factory activity. China is still a manufacturing based economy. Steve, what is the tipping point that is coming up here of where Maura talks about the unrest and the control of the CCP? What is the tipping point as we look ahead?
Well, listen, here's what I think is shocking. I mean, Maura brought it up. Jimmy Lai, who's the publisher, a billionaire himself and a publisher of the Apple News in Hong Kong, plus Albert Ho, and then two other prominent pro-democracy were basically rounded up and arrested for these phony charges of some demonstration in August. The reality was Apple News, we understand, was about to publish the reality of how many victims of the virus are in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong right now, in many places like a ghost town. And every time you put any kind of food on the shelves, there's a run. By that, the CCP is trying to shut that down. Look, it's obvious from these numbers, and I think these numbers are going to have a big impact on the capital markets on Monday, starting Sunday night in Asia, and then through London, and then to Wall Street on Monday and Tuesday, because these show, and you got to remember, as Maura will tell you, they spin every number you ever see to the upside. This is an absolute collapse of the Chinese manufacturing base, and the reality is, and this is what I think the fear is. If you go back to Dr. Toner's study at Johns Hopkins back in the fall of last year. The problem got to be not the first wave, as Hatfield told us, it's the second wave. And, my fear, look, I understand this only with rudimentary knowledge, but what from Hatfield and the other experts have told us is that the second wave of these things are always the worst. And now you're in a situation where the Chinese Communist Party, because of this crisis of legitimacy, has already gone through this massive quarantine exercise, and now, essentially, at the tip of the bayonet, is going to force the workers back to these factories probably too early, probably before you really have a handle on this virus in China. And if that happens, I think then you've got a real problem. I just wouldn't. President Trump has offered in the CDC. Other people around the world have offered them. Some of the best people in the world. They're still fairly in lockdown from allowing the top people in the world to get in there and see what's going on. I just think that we're given all the good work I think you're seeing in Europe and the United States and elsewhere, that still the ticking time bomb on this has been from the beginning. China and really the Chinese Communist Party, of how they've misrepresented, withheld, lied, spun, and now I think could possibly do something that could be quite damaging.
Steve, we know you're going to be joining Maria Bartiromo tomorrow at 10 a.m. on Fox News Channel, which will be another great appearance. Give us a little bit of a preview here on what you think President Trump needs to do domestically and internationally as we talk about the next steps in the coronavirus. I know you talked about, I don't want to steal your thunder, but tell us some of your thoughts on what we're going to hear from you tomorrow.
Well, no, I think President Trump, what he's telling the American people, and I think very powerfully, is, the biggest thing we have to fear here is fear itself. It's just a steady hand and bold action. His bold action, as Hatfield and I talked about early in the first couple, Dr. Hatfield in the first couple shows, was to basically, limit travel of Chinese nationals to the United States and limit travel of people that have been in China to the United States, and then quarantine people. These are actions that have not been taken by an American president in 50 years, and the limits to travel haven't been taken in living memory. Those were bold actions that bought us time. Remember, Hatfield and everybody told us the key thing you need here is time in these public health crises, and that's what we were able to buy. Now, obviously, you have to execute now. I think the central thing, and I think the president is at number one, the task force, and particularly, getting the test kits out, doing things innovatively like Dr. Hatfield recommended on the test. In addition, I think you need to also bifurcate the task force and have people specifically looking at the economic situation and the supply chain and the inextricably linked nature of the logistics chain back to the manufacturing railhead in China has to be really looked at. First off, with Navarre and those guys doing the thing on the mask, the medical consumables, drugs, like Rosemary Gibson says, all of that. Number two is, if these factories can't get started back up, what do we have to do on a Trump time basis to really start to move manufacturing over here? But I still, even with all the good work that the rest of the world can do in all these aspects, both economics and public health, still the center of gravity of this global crisis is in China. And quite frankly, we're in the hands of the decisions of the Chinese Communist Party.
Absolutely. And so, Steve, I want to make sure people are getting this. You're suggesting that President Trump have an economic task force to work in direct coordination with the coronavirus task force because of the looming economic issues that are going to result from this disease going around the world.
Yeah, the one is, obviously, the pandemic is around a virus, but we've also had another contagion. That contagion that's come out is because of as Morris says, the globalization project. The whole nature of the globalization project was this kind of just-in-time inventory system where everything would essentially be made by slave labor in China and then exported throughout the world. Well, the China price comes at a huge cost, and we're now seeing what that cost is. And I do think you need a group, Mnuchin, Peter Navarro, Larry Kudlow, Wilbur Ross, this economic team that, quite frankly, brought economic growth in the tailwinds of kind of softening world economy. I think the same group around the president, he's a business guy and a man of action, just ought to bifurcate this and have also an economic task force that deals with all these aspects, because I think we've still got tremendous headwinds coming out of China.
Absolutely right. And we just have a few minutes left. Jack Maxey, one of the things we've done great on War Room Pandemic, giving folks a sense of what's coming up next. What are we going to see in the headlines coming up tomorrow and on Monday?
I think that what you're going to see is that the American people are going to be confused by what's happened over the weekend. I think it's very critical that the people in political authority start being absolutely straight with everybody, let everybody know. American people are perfectly able to accept the truth, but they got to get the truth, and that's the key. And if I have any recommendation for the political leadership, it is to let us know exactly what is going on, because we are not afraid if we know what we're supposed to be confronting. That's what I think the big story is going to be on Monday, is how it is that we're going to attack this along the lines of what Dr. Hatfield spoke about in the first part of the show, because now people know it is here, or potentially so.
And Dr. Hatfield, one thing that every American should do this weekend to put you on the spot, besides wash your hands.
Stay strong. And believe there are some very, very intelligent, good people working day and night on this problem. Stay strong. We'll see what happens. Panic is the worst thing.
That's fantastic insight. And I think, it, again, warrants mentioning President Trump's strong early action on this, and
Absolutely.
how much better of a position we are in since he took those travel restrictions, and also as he's considering additional travel restrictions regarding Italy and South Korea and other places. He's making the right moves.
Yes.
Warren Moynihan, you've given us some great insight into China. What do you see this next week, or even these next 2 weeks, looking like? We just have about 2 minutes left here as far as what are the next events that are coming up that we should be paying attention to.
Well, there's no doubt that the cases are going to continue to. They've renamed the coronavirus pneumonia, and over 5,000 to 6,000 cases have been reported, but they're not calling it the coronavirus. This is obviously pressure from the CCP. Again, as I said earlier, the priority for the CCP is to maintain control and power. And they don't care if a great many of their citizens die in the process. They also don't care about the lives of the countries on the periphery of China. And I think that as the cases also escalate in places like Europe and here in the United States, I'm very much hoping there is going to be a re-examination of our close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, and to see that this is not an alliance with the Chinese people. It's an alliance with the people who have kept the population of the world's largest country in bondage all these years. And let's bifurcate support. Who do we support? Do we support the Chinese people or the CCP?
Fantastic insight. We have about a minute left. I want to close on this point that in America, we're seeing so much of this narrative being from many in the media and from Democrats that the coronavirus is somehow going to take down President Trump, or this is going to be what defeats President Trump heading into the fall, which I think that is completely idiotic. I think one of the important things here is that President Trump, now being a wartime president, it will be his strong leadership on this issue that could actually determine the fall election. I think this is very critical as we watch this toward the end here.
And if I can also just say, this is a bipartisan issue. This doesn't have anything to do with party. This is a humanitarian issue, a medical crisis, as Dr. Hadfield said. And I think everyone really has to stop this partisan nonsense and focus on survival.
A few seconds left. I just want to say thank you for listening to War Room Pandemic, episode 29. We'll be back on Monday.